there's two sets of narrations regarding the raising of the hands in Salah. In the view of Imam Abu Hanifa and his teachers like Hamad bin Abi Sulaiman and his teacher Ibrahim al-Nakhai and his teachers Al-Kama and Aswad, from their teacher Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, that the Prophet ﷺ would only raise his hands at the beginning of Salah. This is the version from Ibn Mas'ud, and not just Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, but also from other famous companions like Ali bin Abi Talib. Now what we see is from Ali bin Abi Talib, there is one set of narrations saying that the Prophet ﷺ used to raise his hands when going into ruku as well, and coming up from ruku as well. Then we find another set of narrations from Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu saying that the Prophet ﷺ used to only raise his hands in the initial takbir. So how do we harmonize this now? How? The madhab of Abu Hanifa and most of the Malikis as well, meaning the madhab of Imam Malik, act upon the narration of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. But as for the narration from Ali, how do we harmonize it? Which one do we give priority to, preference to? In the Hanafi school, I'm giving the Hanafi perspective here, the action from Ali radiallahu anhu, or the narration from Ali radiallahu anhu, that he didn't raise, or narrated that the Prophet didn't raise his hands except at the beginning, is the final one. Why give preference to that narration, not the one where Ali radiallahu anhu narrates that the Prophet did raise his hands when going into ruku and coming up from ruku? Why not that one? Because in the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shayba, we find that a group of the students of Ali radiallahu anhu themselves narrate that Ali radiallahu anhu didn't used to raise his hands in Salah except at the beginning. So this is a way of harmonizing what he narrated and his own action. Alright? So the Hanafi school says, look, Ali radiallahu anhu, though he narrated, the Prophet did do this act of raising. Which set of narration do we give preference to or priority over? His own action. And what shows that that was his final action is the fact that his own students saw Ali radiallahu anhu not doing that. The same applies to the narration, the famous narration of Abdullah ibn Umar, the Hanafi school and most of the Maliki school, because there are some Malikis who do allow raising of the hands, by the way, but the final view of Imam Malik is in line with Abu Hanifa. We know that from the Mudawwana al-Kubra of Sahnun, from Ibn al-Qasim, who was a famous student of Imam Malik. Imam Malik is on record as saying that raising the hands in the subsequent stages of Salah is a da'if opinion. This is Imam Malik's last view, though there are narrations saying he used to do the act of Raful Yadain. What I'm trying to say is that there is a process where harmonization was acted upon by looking at two sets of narrations. Going back to the famous narration of Abdullah ibn Umar, if you look at the Sihah Sitta, you find a famous narration from Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu saying that the Prophet ﷺ used to raise his hands not just at the beginning but going into ruku, coming up from the ruku, coming up for the third rakat as well. Now, how do you explain that one away if you're a Hanafi or a Maliki? Okay, how do you harmonize it? Why not act on the narration of Abdullah ibn Umar? Why do you give priority to the narration of Ibn Mas'ud? How do we harmonize it? We look at who narrated it. We look at the status of the companion who narrated it. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is one of the early people to embrace Islam. One of the first people to embrace Islam. So he kept very close companionship with the Prophet ﷺ, and because he's one of the elders, he had the opportunity to stand towards the front of the masjid, seeing the Prophet ﷺ close quarters. And there was also narrations mentioning Abdullah bin Mas'ud would go in and out of the household of the Prophet ﷺ, that the other companions thought he was one of the Ahlul Bayt, one of the household of the Prophet ﷺ. And then Ali radiallahu anhu is one of the Ahlul Bayt as well. So the narration of Abdullah ibn Umar is a Sahabi, and he was from the younger companions. He was only around 15 when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, so he didn't have that much time and opportunity to accompany the Prophet ﷺ at close quarters. He would be most likely towards the back of the masjid in Medina. I'm talking about Masjid al-Nabawi. He would be more likely to be at the back because he's of the younger companions, and the elders would be given priority. He narrates that the Prophet ﷺ used to raise his hand going into ruku and coming up from ruku. So how do the Hanafis, for example, explain or harmonize this narration? They say that let's look at his own action. Again, in the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shayba and in the work of At-Tahawi, you see the name here, Shar Mushkilul Athar, you will see in both of these works, they have given a chain of narration going back to Mujahid ibn Jabr, a famous tabi'i, a famous commentator of the Quran, because he learned the commentary of the Quran from the most famous commentator of the Quran from the Sahaba. Who is he? Abdullah ibn Abbas. Mujahid narrates that Abdullah ibn Umar himself, he witnessed him only raising the hands in the initial takbir. So the Hanafi scholars, they say, look, this is the way we harmonize it. It might be in Bukhari, it might be in Muslim and many other books of hadith, but this is not the way to give priority to one set over the other. Let's see, if we can, what's the actual action of that companion. Does he act upon what he narrates? According to Hanafi scholars, if Ibn Umar himself is not acted upon what he narrated, then we should not act upon that hadith that he initially narrated, because later on he must have come to realize that the Prophet ﷺ himself stopped doing that act. So both sets of narrations, according to Hanafi scholars of hadith at least, maybe others will disagree, Hanafi scholars of hadith have said both sets are authentic. One is given priority to the other from that respect. Yesterday I mentioned to you a book called Al-Khilafiyat of Al-Bayhaqi. Khilafiyat is a work by Al-Bayhaqi, a rare book that not many scholars had access to, and most of it remains in manuscript format. Part of it has been printed. The Kitab al-Tahara section has been printed, not the Kitab al-Salah section. In there, Al-Bayhaqi, who is a Shafi'i, he talks about the differences between Abu Hanifa and Shafi'i, and he gives priority to, obviously, his Imam al-Shafi'i, quotes Ash-Shafi'i's evidences, and he quotes Abu Hanifa's evidences, and he likes to take the priority to the Shafi'i angle because he's from the Shafi'i madhab. But anyway, in the Khilafiyat of Al-Bayhaqi, there is another narration from Ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Umar, saying that the Prophet ﷺ only raised his hands at the beginning, and then he didn't repeat, meaning in ruku and coming up from ruku. This narration, Bayhaqi quotes it with his chain, and he quotes his teacher Al-Hakim declaring it to be false. He declares it to be false, but those who came later and looked at the chain of transmission couldn't find any blemish in the chain. It's all fully connected, it meets the 5 criteria, and some later scholars, particularly from the Hanafi school again, one famous scholar, Hafiz Alauddin al-Mughulta'i. Mughulta'i was a great scholar of hadith who wrote a 25-volume commentary to Sahih al-Bukhari. It hasn't been printed today. Al-Mughulta'i, he mentioned this narration in his commentary to Sunan of Ibn Majah, which is available in print. And he knew of this narration from the Khilafiyat of Al-Bayhaqi, and he declared the chain to be authentic. Later scholars as well, another Hafiz of hadith from the Hanafi school I'm talking about, Muhammad Abid al-Sindi, just over 2 centuries ago. Muhammad Abid al-Sindi, who was known as the Hafiz of the Haramain, Hafiz of Makkah and Medina in his time, he also declared it to be authentic, and some others as well. So, okay, Al-Hakim's got his view, but Al-Hakim and Al-Bayhaqi, they didn't give any reason whatsoever. What's wrong with the chain? Who's at fault? If they're claiming it to be forged or fabricated, who's at fault? Isolate and identify the narrator. So there is one, this narration is acted by later Hanafi scholars like Imam Anwar Shah al-Kashmiri mentions it as well in his treatise called Nail al-Farqadain, a book dealing with just this issue of raising the hands in Salah. So this is just one example of 2 sets of narrations which apparently are authentic, but you have to give priority to one set over the other. Harmonization, the process of harmonization. And all this I've just mentioned is from the Hanafi school, and other schools will give their own examples and ways to explain why their set of narrations should be given preference to. And we respect that, and it shouldn't be ikhtilaf in the sense that it leads to attacking each other critically. Both madhabs or both views have evidences, but you act according to one set, and Allah knows best.